This was Peter's favorite time of year, late fall. Almost all the leaves had fallen from the trees and the crisp. Cool temperatures made for almost perfect weather for him. Peter was a mailman in a somewhat affluent suburb of the city, doing one of the few remaining runs that still had delivery door to door. He would start at one end of the neighborhood, and at a good work rate would be able to complete his deliveries before 2 in the afternoon. He enjoyed his work and tried to keep a quick pace, both for the health benefit it provided and to be able to finish his day early. He never saw many people on his run. Those he came across would make like he wasn't there, a part of the background, if you will. Peter didn't mind much. He would just smile after trying to make some eye contact, then continue on his way. It was early one morning, a little bit into his route, when he came across a little boy sitting on the steps of an older house. He may have delivered here 100 times already, if not more. Rarely did he see anyone around that place, but from his vague memory, he recalls he may have come across this boy once or twice. This time seemed different, like he almost was waiting for him. He was no more than 10, a bit pale with sandy blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and also expression on his face. He never took his eyes off of Peter as he sat there on the steps, waiting for the mailman to make his delivery. Peter thrust a letter into the boy's outstretched hand and gave him a smile. He continued on his way, oblivious to the boy's eyes as they followed him down the street. The next day was similar, only the boy was at a house further up the street earlier on his run, and Peter went through motions, putting the envelopes in the boy's hand and walked towards the next house. Although he knew that the boy probably didn't live at the house he found him at, he almost felt compelled to hand him the mail. Every day their little game continued, and every day the boy was waiting at a house further and further up the street. Peter would spot the boy from a distance, and sure enough there would always be a delivery for the house where the boy sat. There were never any words exchanged between them, but a general uneasiness on Peter's part started to become quite evident every time he approached the steps where the lad sat. Peter started being very anxious about this part of his job. He felt a sense of dread as he would approach the boy and almost be frightened in his presence. Peter could feel that something just wasn't right with the whole situation. The next day started like any other. But as he made his way towards the boy's street, he realized the object of his angst would probably be at the first house on the block, due to him moving up the street a few houses each day. He turned the corner and was greeted with a makeshift memorial right on the curve. Propped up on the lamppost were flowers, crosses, little stuffed animals, and a few toys. Warily, Peter looked over to the first house, almost shaking. The memorial is for the boy. It must be for the boy, Peter thought. He looked over to the house, half expecting not to see him. The boy, however, was there, sitting on the steps waiting for him. The scene seemed even scarier this time. Given Peter's revelation, the boy was looking down at his own feet this time, a few tears visible on his pale cheeks. The mailman reluctantly approached him with his usual letters and put them in his hand. "Do you know what happened here?" Peter asked the boy. The little boy looked up a bit and nodded, more tears streaming down his cheeks. He pointed to the memorial at the foot of the lamppost and then upwards, to a paper taped at about eye level that Peter didn't notice. Even though he couldn't read the words from where he was, he knew what the newspaper clippings said. "That's about you, isn't it?" Peter asked, his voice almost breaking. He couldn't believe he was speaking with a child who had died tragically at this spot. "No," the boy answered, almost in a whisper. "It's about both of us." Peter put his head in his hands and sobbed uncontrollably. The memories of the accident came flooding back. The car careening out of control, him trying to push the boy out of the way, the hit and run that disastrously took both their lives. "What's your name?" Peter asked as he tried to compose himself with this new truth. Michael, said the boy in a bit of a stronger voice than before. "Well, Michael, I think I can finish early today," Peter told him. He put his mail bag down onto the manicured lawn and started walking down the street, leaving the makeshift memorial on the corner behind them. Michael got up off the steps and followed. "I've heard it said before that if you believe in angels, you must believe in demons as well. I'm not sure if I truly believe that either really exist, and my leanings change from mood to mood, but there are times when I wonder if there is something there watching us, cloaked in the dark, hating us. When I felt the presence of something I couldn't see, when instincts overrode logic and I couldn't close my eyes or turn my back to it because I just didn't know. West, I can say with a certain amount of confidence that everyone has felt this way at some point in their life with varying degrees of intensity and frequency, but that's not what this is about, not entirely anyway. When I let myself believe in such things, I realized that it started around 10 years ago when I spent a week at my aunt and uncle's house. They lived several hours away from my own home, and this was something I had always hated, seeing as their children were the only ones in the family anywhere close to my age. There were plenty of movies, games, and other activities to keep me occupied during my stay, bookending my experience in a way that nearly erased it from my thoughts altogether. Afterwards, it had seemed such a small thing to me that I mentioned it to no one. It was late at night at some point in the middle of my stay. I woke in quite suddenly in my bed for seemingly no reason at all, and couldn't get back to sleep even after what seemed to be hours of laying in the dark. Defeated, I decided to get up and move around, maybe get a glass of water before trying again. I looked to the clock and noticed that it was very late early morning in fact. 3-something it said, but what could I do? As I walked out into the hallway, I noticed that I didn't feel quite right, a bit sick in my stomach and slightly anxious, unsettled. I turned on every light I came across, but maybe that was only my childish fear of the dark getting the best of me. I was only 11 at the time after all. Despite my attempts to reason my dread away, to banish it as I had done the dark, the feeling persisted all the way to the kitchen. I needed to calm down if I was to get any further sleep that night. I got myself a glass, filled it from the tap, and sat down at the kitchen table. I felt a bit lonely knowing that I was the only person awake in the house, and I disliked looking at the empty chairs, so I turned my gaze to the large glass doors instead, the impenetrable pitch of the night blocking the backyard from view. I couldn't see anything out there, but I froze instantly, instinctively. I was being watched, something was approaching the door, the windows, I couldn't see it, but it could see me clearly. With all the light flooding the kitchen, I was bathed in it, completely exposed, but I couldn't see out. Everything was awful. I wanted to run, but I couldn't make myself move an inch, not even to look away, and these flimsy, hateful walls, a thin pane of glass. What good would any of that do? None. Nowhere was safe, and it was coming. Soon enough, I could make out the shape. It was at eye level with me on all fours. I couldn't see it with my eyes, not physically, but something in me inexplicably knew it was there, knew what it looked like and how it moved. Closer still, and I could distinguish its features. Thick, matted black fur against the black night, a chain around its throat, and yellow eyes that stared in at me through the glass. Its teeth and maw were dripping with saliva. It was a large dog, and it wasn't at the same time. It stopped just outside the door and glared at me. The snarls ripped from its throat, but I couldn't hear any of it, not really. I was too terrified to move, paralyzed by its malevolent gaze. It's not real, so I thought I'd just get up and walk away, go back to bed. Eventually, I did. I left my water on the table, full and tepid, and crept quietly up the stairs. It felt as if any sudden moves might set it off, so I did everything slowly and carefully until I was lying in my bed. Despite my expectations, I was able to fall asleep relatively quickly. I don't think I even dreamed. Babysitting with and learning with the light of day and the presence of other people around me. The whole thing could be written off as a figment of my imagination. I was obviously spooked by something from the moment I got up, so it wasn't that far-fetched that my mind would play such a trick on me. But I didn't say anything to anyone simply because I didn't think it was anything significant. I mean, what even happened? I didn't exactly forget about it, but I didn't let it worry me either. It wasn't even something to move on from, just a strange thing that happened. Life went on. The next few years were difficult and rather hard on my family, financially, emotionally, and health-wise as well. We got along well enough even after our house was foreclosed on. We switched towns, switched schools, and moved to a much smaller house as we waited for things to get better. I was 14 and starting high school when things started to settle down again. I didn't exactly approve of our new home. My brother and I lived downstairs in the basement, and our rooms shared a wall. We enjoyed each other's company well enough, so it wasn't that bad spending so much time together, but there were times when he could get on my nerves. I would often stay up rather late reading in my room, and I eventually came to notice a strange clicking noise coming from his bedroom every couple of nights around midnight. It sounded as if he was flicking his light on and off, but why would he do that? I decided to just leave him be for a while. But the thing is, the more I noticed it, the more it started to bother me. I came to expect it to happen almost every night. A couple of weeks later, it was keeping me up at night, wondering what my brother thought he was doing, waiting until it would eventually stop. After a bit of internal debate, I decided to just ask him to please stop. May stop, perhaps not so nicely though. However, when I knocked and opened his door, I found the room dark and my brother himself in bed, apparently fast asleep. How strange. I closed the door and returned to my room. The odd noise persisted. The next day, I decided that I was going to do a little experiment. Something must be making that noise after all. I told my brother what I noticed and asked him to go around the basement rooms and click various things, lights, doors, anything, while I waited and listened in my room for the sound that matched the one I was hearing at night. It turns out it was the light in the little closet with the boiler that was attached to his room. There was a bare light bulb inside, and the pulling of that chain made the noise I had been hearing at night. There was no further explanation to be found. Soon after, my brother started reporting strange dreams, and the eerie feeling that he was being watched even during the day. I assumed this was in response to our discovery and mentally dismissed it while outwardly showing my support and sympathy, until I started experiencing the same sort of thing. I would wake up at night paralyzed with fear, sometimes coming out of disturbing nightmares, other times out of perfectly normal sleep. I could no longer fall asleep with my back exposed. I found myself unable to bear leaving my door open at night. During the day, I felt paranoid, always looking over my shoulder and waiting for something to hurt me. Weeks later, something finally happened to me while I was lifting my foot to climb the stairs and join my family for a meal. Not a single thought in my head. I was suddenly awash with terror. I just ran to the door at the top of the stairs, frightened out of my wits for no apparent reason. When I stepped into the daylight, I turned around and looked behind me. It was there at the bottom of the stairs watching me, that dog. I knew it was there, but I couldn't see it. Just like before. I closed the door and walked into the kitchen. No one saw or heard anything of my momentary panic, and I didn't feel like enlightening them. Not even my brother. Strange noises are fine, a creepy, unexplainable thing, but you're seeing phantom dogs now lighter. A stupid, overactive imagination? Calm the hell down. I didn't want to go back down there ever. Biboshli teachers got back into the habit of it. Feeling constant dread, that's just normal. Cringing away from empty air, normal. Nightmare again, totally normal. My parents started arguing a lot. Dad would leave going out on walks to clear his head's gone for so long we'd start to wonder if he was ever coming back. We moved again, switched towns, switched schools. My grades went down the toilet. My real-life problems chased the unnatural fear away. Everything sort of peaked and then slowly started to get better over the course of the next year. My aunt and uncle came to town, and we went out to lunch one day. The conversation was lighthearted enough between my siblings and cousins until my brother brought up the weird happenings in our old house. My cousin latched onto this and told us a few paranormal stories of her own. One day she said she was playing with her friends in their old backyard when she heard a noise. She said she didn't really hear it exactly, but she knew the sound. When she looked up, she saw a great big dead dog with a jingling chain around its neck. She had screamed and run inside to her mom, crying uncontrollably and completely inconsolable. She said she didn't really understand what had happened. Feeling distinctly unsettled, I asked her what the dog looked like. Big and black, she said, with shaggy fur. Yellow eyes, I asked. Yes, yellow eyes, and it was bigger than a normal dog. Taller. Basile saying sure everything then I saw that dog too? When I was staying at your house. I told them the short little story of how I woke up and saw a big, scary dog through the doors in their kitchen. We thought it was fun, the strange coincidence. Apparently, it was around the same time as well. What was going on then? I wondered aloud. Well, that was right around the time a close relative started to get so dangerously sick. That was right before Mom and Dad's business started going down. An uncle lost his job, and my various family couples started fighting. And then we lost the house, but then things started to get better until it showed up again. What if? No way. This was just a figment of my imagination and hers, a coincidence. There was no demon dog following us around and bringing misfortune to our family. No way. Demons aren't real, angels aren't real either. There's nothing watching from the shadows waiting while people sleep. There can't be. Because if there is, I don't think I could ever feel safe again. There's nothing there. Saying it doesn't help much when I can feel it so strongly, watching its gaze prickling all along my spine. What if our eyes aren't seeing everything that's really there, and there is something in the dark that just wants to spread pain and misery? There would be no reasoning with such things, no fighting. So they can't be real. Babysitting is a short, scary story about a teenage girl who responds to an ad looking for a live-in nanny. She needs the money, but when she meets the children she is supposed to babysit, they seem a little strange. When I dropped out of school, it wasn't easy to find work. Nobody seemed to want to hire a girl with no qualifications. I was tired of applying for jobs advertised in newspapers on the internet without receiving any replies. One day, I spotted an ad for a job that was not so tempting, but I really needed the money. They had said they were looking for a live-in babysitter to take care of 3 young children. It said no qualifications necessary. They just required someone young, responsible, and pretty. Fiestan called the number, and the phone was answered by a woman with a sweet and friendly voice. When I told her I was calling about the babysitting job, she hired me on the spot. She didn't even want to meet me in person first, but she said she needed me to start immediately. I was delighted. The next morning, I drove over to the house to meet the family. As soon as I got there, I saw that the house was beautiful both inside and out. You could tell that the family was wealthy. The woman and her husband greeted me with broad smiles on their faces and introduced me to their children. There were 2 boys and a girl. Sebastian was 6 years old. Damien was 5 and Lenka was 4. The kids seemed to be nice, happy, and friendly. They were always polite, never fought with each other, and never made a mess. All they did was play alone or read a book. The parents announced that they were going out to dinner and wouldn't be home until late that night. They told me the children had already been fed, so all I had to do was get them ready for bed. The mother gave me a phone number and told me to call her if there was an emergency. The father told me to make myself at home, and if I was hungry, he said I could take whatever I wanted from the refrigerator. After their parents left, the children sat down on the sofa to watch TV. They were very quiet and barely said a word. During a commercial, I was feeling a bit hungry, so I went into the kitchen to make myself a snack. As I was rummaging around in the refrigerator, I couldn't help but notice 2 large jars that were stuffed in the back of the fridge. Both of them were wrapped in plain brown paper and had a rubber band sealing the rim. I wondered what on earth could be in them. My curiosity got the better of me, so I took out one of the jars and peeled back the brown wrapper to take a little peek. It was full of long strips of fatty meat floating in a murky red liquid. I couldn't tell what kind of meat it was, but it didn't look like pork or beef. Just as I was about to put the jar back where I found it, I heard a noise behind me. It startled me so much, I banged my head on the shelf above me. When I turned around, Sebastian was standing in the doorway staring at me. "Put that back," he said. "That's not for you." The look in his eyes and the tone of his voice sent chills down my spine. "Sorry," I muttered. "I was just looking for something to eat." Sebastian didn't reply. He just stood there staring at me. I placed the jar back in the refrigerator and shut the door. Sebastian turned around and went back into the living room. I had lost my appetite, so I went joined the children in the living room and watched cartoons with them. I was trying not to let my imagination get the better of me when the cartoons finished and the news came on. There was a story about a teenage girl who had gone missing. The police found her decomposing head in a dumpster. They said they had no idea what had happened to the rest of her. I was afraid the grisly news story would upset the children, so I changed the channel and told them it was time for bed. The kids didn't complain. They just walked up the stairs in single file and went to their bedroom. I put them in their pajamas and got them ready for bed. Then I tucked them in, kissed them all goodnight, and switched out the lights. When I went back downstairs, I was bored and had absolutely nothing to do, so I decided to watch a movie. I looked through the family's DVD collection, but all they had were cartoons and Disney movies. I wasn't in the mood for any more kid stuff. On the bottom shelf, I spotted some old VHS tapes. One of them had a strange title. It was Girls. This seemed rather curious, so I decided to take a look at it. I put the videotape in the VCR and pressed play, then sat down on the sofa and made myself comfortable while the video started. The first thing I noticed was that it was a home video. The family must have recorded it themselves. The parents and children were all laughing and looking like they were having fun. I was about to turn it off when I happened to notice someone else in the video. It was a girl who looked like she was in her late teens. It seemed like she was the previous babysitter. She looked very familiar. It seemed like I recognized her from somewhere. Perhaps she went to my school. Then it finally hit me. Oh my freaking God. I thought it was the missing girl from the news report. My hands were shaking. My whole body was trembling. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. I jumped out of my seat, ejected the video, and put it back in its case. Then I remembered the jars in the refrigerator. I had to see what was in those jars. With a shudder, I went to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. And maybe I'm just overreacting, I thought. I reached and took out the second jar, peeling back the brown paper wrapper. I could see long, pale hunks of meat and strips of fat floating in the red liquid. Some of the meat looked like it had skin on it. Human skin. I could also see what looked like strands of hair. Long hair. Human hair. I was so scared, I felt like I was about to pee my pants. I ripped off the rubber band that was sealing the jar and peered inside. There was an eyeball staring back at me. Horrified, I dropped the jar and it smashed on the kitchen floor. I ran to the living room, put on my jacket, grabbed the videotape and stuffed it into my pocket. When I came out to the hallway, Sebastian was standing at the foot of the stairs. "Where are you going?" he asked. I just remembered, I stammered, I forgot something. I have to go home and get it. I'll be back in a few minutes. Damien and Lenka came running down the stairs. "You can't go," screeched Damien. "You can't leave us on our own. I'm calling our parents," shouted Lenka as she picked up the phone and began dialing numbers. Sebastian grabbed hold of my leg and wouldn't let go. "You have to stay," He squealed, "We're hungry." His grip was extremely tight, but I managed to shake him off and ran out the front door. As I dashed to my car, I saw the parents pulling into the driveway. I didn't stop for a moment. I just jumped into my car and locked all the doors. The children were on the doorstep, screaming and crying. The mother and father got out of their car and they came running over. There was an angry look on their faces. "What's wrong?" They shouted. "Where are you going? Come back here." I didn't answer. I just turned the key in the ignition and revved the engine. They started banging on the windows. I floored the accelerator and tore out of there like a bat out of hell and never looked back. I didn't stop until I came to the police station. I told the police officers everything I knew and handed over the videotape as evidence. The police immediately dispatched 2 patrol cars. By the time they arrived at the house, the parents and children were gone. They just took their car and disappeared. The police searched the house and found the jars in the refrigerator. They also found human flesh and bones in the basement. They did tests and confirmed that these were the remains of the missing girl. They never managed to track down the parents or the children. They're still out there somewhere, probably living under a different name, probably still on the hunt for new victims. If you want my advice, be careful who you are babysitting for. The Laughing Man is a scary story about 2 men who go into the jungles of Africa and try to trap a rare species of ape. It is based on an old horror comic that appeared in Creepy 95. There was a doctor who worked in a remote village in Africa. He was the only white person for miles, and he had spent half his life taking care of the local villagers, providing them with medical care and medicine. One day, a white man stumbled into the village. He could barely walk, but he was laughing like a maniac. Ha ha. He. Ha ha ha. His clothes were tattered and torn and his hands and knees were covered in blood. His eyes were wild and he looked exhausted. It seemed like he was out of his mind. The doctor gave him some water and tended to his wounds, but the man couldn't stop laughing. Ah ha ha. He. Ha ha ha. The doctor gave him a sedative and put him to bed, so he could get some rest. The man slept for hours, and when he woke up, the doctor gave him some food and tried to find out how he had come to be there. "What happened to you?" the doctor asked. "What are you doing all alone out here in the jungle?" "I wasn't alone," the Laughing Man replied. "Same with my partner Jack Hunter. We were on an expedition to find the legendary waki, that's what the locals call them, a rare species of ape. The Africans say they're intelligent apes, almost as intelligent as a human, maybe even more intelligent. We wanted to capture one and bring it back to civilization to put it on display. It's supposed to make us very rich. We tried to hire a guide to take us into the Valley of the Apes, but none of the locals dared to go there. They were afraid of the apes. We weren't going to let that stop us, so we bought a canoe and headed down the river on our own. When we came to the Valley of the Apes, we made camp. Hunter unpacked the traps and set them up in a clearing in the jungle. We hid in the bushes and watched those traps for 3 whole days, but we caught nothing. The apes were too smart for us. They knew what we were up to. They weren't going to fall for simple traps. Hunter had a better idea. We dug a pit in the clearing. It was 10 feet deep and filled with sharp wooden spikes. Then we covered it over with branches and leaves and went back to our camp to wait. We didn't have to wait very long. In the middle of the night, we heard a loud scream, a horrible gurgling animal scream. We rushed out to check on the pit and found a dead ape, impaled on the sharp wooden spikes. We dragged the corpse out and laid it on the ground. We had what we came for, double a dead AP, and I wanted to go home. Hunter had other ideas. He wanted to capture a live one. Rai tried to talk him out of it, but there was no reasoning with him. Nothing I could say would dissuade him. He took out a knife and started skinning the ape's body. As he worked, I nervously watched the jungle around us. It was dark, but I could feel the eyes of the other apes watching us. I couldn't shake the creeping fear that they knew we had killed one of them and the rest would come to take revenge. When Hunter finished skinning the ape, he put on its skin and wore it like a costume. We removed the sharp wooden spikes from the pit and placed a big log across it. Disguised in his ape costume, Hunter balanced on the log, and I covered the pit up with branches and leaves again. His plan was to trick one of the other apes into coming closer, so it would fall into the trap. He crouched there on the log and waited while I went back to our camp. It was almost dawn and I was just about to doze off. When I heard the scream, I rushed out to check the pit, but it was empty and my friend Hunter was nowhere to be seen. I called out his name, but there was no reply. I searched for hours, but I could find no trace of him. I was about to give up hope when I spotted a figure in the jungle. It was Hunter. He was crouched down under a tree, naked as the day he was born, and he was just staring at me with a blank look on his face. "Hunter," I cried. Good Lord, What happened to you? I thought you were dead. Why didn't you answer me? Hunter didn't say a word. Slowly, he rose to his feet and he just stood there staring at me. And then, ha 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 ha. And then, he. And then, he took it off. Ha ha ha. He. The man was shaking and laughing so much, he could barely control himself. His body was racked by spasms of madness. What do you mean? The doctor asked. What did he take off? Giggling like a maniac, the man struggled to finish his story. Ha ha ha, he took it off, ha ha. The ape took off Hunter's skin. We are all too familiar with creepy basements. And we all know the feeling you get when you turn the lights off before running up the stairs, praying nothing will grab your ankle before the last step. As children, we would dread trips to the cellar, the cold room, and that cramped, zesty smelling spot under the stairs when we would have to retrieve that old box of Christmas decorations. No, creepy does not cut it. Words like disturbing, freakish, and hair-raisingly avoidable come to mind. For me, however, there was one shining diamond that stood out against the endlessly black coal, our newly renovated bathroom. This safe hold pleasantly contrasted the cracked cement floors, dark, musty-smelling crawl spaces, and spiders the size of mice who you could find in every corner, and if you were lucky, crawling up your sock. I would descend a creaking staircase, carpeted with short mold-ridden shag, and a stairway immune to daylight, scurry past a hole in the wall that seemed fit for a grab-by hand, and finally step into the serene safety of the bathroom. Here I would shower morning after morning. Here I would be protected by the solid oak door, the only remaining piece of the old bathroom and the only part of the basement that filled me with feelings other than unease. Naturally, this was the last piece to be taken out. This was the one thing that was not like the others, and this one thing had to go, according to my parents anyway, for precisely one day. Meaning one night, one morning, one shower of which the trustworthy door would not serve as my protector. The door would be gone, I would have to wait while the new door was whisked in. This day is one I will hardly miss. The thought of this one day will later be the reason I decide to go to bed early, or keep the light on while I sleep, or more likely, don't sleep. And I twist the knob, allowing an initial burst of frigid water to spit forth. A few seconds later, calming warmth follows. The shower is just like all the others, or so I tell myself. I step in and slide the frosted glass door shut. I peer through at the warped, glossy objects on the other side, morphed into entropy. With the door to the bathroom removed, I can see into my laundry room. I move side to side, and it looks like thousands of tiny creatures squirming around in the darkness, all of them knowing now is the time to strike. There is a certain feeling that engulfs one's body when they suspect there is another presence amongst them, and one of which they would rather not alert the attention of. It is somewhat akin to the feeling of standing on a freshly frozen pond. Then you hear the ice crack. You don't move. You try not to breathe. Currently, this is me. I fully step into the falling stream of heat. I shiver as my body warms up, but wince as my frozen toes burn. I squirt some shampoo into my hand, work it into my hair. I wet my head under the water, then turn back quickly to the door to make sure nothing has changed. Closing my eyes is inevitable. I shut them and stick my head under the water, rinsing furiously so I can open them again. With just my four senses against my fears, I begin to panic. It is then the blissful current of warmth changes to an icy blast. My back arches away from it. My mouth instinctively opens to let out a small gasp. I turn quickly and stick my hand out into the stream, half protecting myself, half waiting for the heat to return. I'm still waiting. Still ice cold. I would have reached out and twisted the knob further to the left. I would have then waited and been rewarded with the return of heated water. This all would have happened were there not already a hand there. I immediately open my eyes after what seems like every muscle in my body trying to burst through my skin. Following this is the stinging. All the suds pooling in my eyes send bolts of lightning coursing through my face. I need to open my eyes but can't. There is a certain feeling one gets when they know they're in danger, but are deprived of their senses. It's the feeling you get when you wake up in the middle of the night from a strange noise and try to find the light switch. You slide your feet off the edge of the bed and tiptoe towards your door in pitch blackness. Getting the lights on is your only thought. For some reason, the switch eludes you. Your hand frantically searches the walls, your heart beating into your eardrums as you turn in panic circles. Currently, this is me. This is all too much for my mind. I'm quivering as I shrink to the floor of the shower, that feeling of spiders crawling over my body, as I wait for something to touch my wet, exposed skin. My eyes still burning, I cup some water in my hands from the running stream of ice. I splash it in my eyes, doing my best to open them at the same time. I blink a couple of times with my face pointing down. I muster all my courage to look to the knob. In the cold shower of water, droplets fall and explode into mist off my head as I turn to see the hand is gone. I feel some warm life come back into my body. I was almost convinced I had imagined the whole thing. I would have stood up and finished my shower in the confidence of a warm flow of water and my newly sound senses. This all would have happened if a cold wind had not blown in and cooled the already frigid layer of moisture on my skin, sending a shiver through my spine and down my arms. I would have been so reassured if that thing would have just remembered to close the sliding door. Gone Fishing is a scary story about two boys who encounter a strange man down by the river in their small town. This morning, bright and early, my friend Oleg and I decided to go fishing. We live in a very small town and there is never much to do. We were dying of boredom. However, this morning it was even more quiet than usual. The streets were empty and there was nobody around. The town was eerily quiet. We went down an overgrown path that led to the river. When we got there, we saw a strange figure in a dark green hood crouching on the riverbank. He was holding a fishing rod in his hand. "Good morning," I called out. "Are the fish biting today?" The man didn't answer. He just gave a hoarse laugh and started to sway slightly from side to side. I went closer and asked again, "Are the fish biting?" I took 2 more steps and then stopped in my tracks. The man began to sway faster and faster. I couldn't see his face because it was obscured by the hood. Just then, I saw something that horrified me. At his feet, there was a human hand severed at the wrist. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I started to back away. The man slowly turned his head to face me. I saw a pair of piercing red eyes and sharp dark yellow teeth. Instead of a nose, he just had 2 triangular holes. He stared directly at me and opened his mouth in a bloody grin. I turned and ran back to Alexei. Not knowing what I had seen, he looked at me in bewilderment. I glanced behind me. The man in the hood was standing up and coming towards us. Without waiting to see what would happen next, I grabbed Oleg by the hand and dragged him with me, shouting, "Run!" We rushed into the trees, looking back over our shoulders every 5 seconds to make sure the man wasn't following us. We sprinted through the undergrowth and made our way to the police station. On the way, I told Oleg in a trembling voice about the severed hand and the man's terrifying face. He was scared too. When we reached the police station, I pulled on the door handle, but it was locked. We both pounded on the glass, but there was no answer. "Listen, I'm going to see if I can get inside," I said. "You stay here and keep watch in case that crazy guy comes." Oleg was shaking and said, "But I'm scared. What am I going to do if he didn't let him finish?" I ran around the corner and found an open window at the back of the building. I climbed up through it and found myself in the bathroom of the police station. When I opened the door, I peered out and saw a dark corridor. The light was flickering ominously. Summoning all my courage, I walked down the hallway and came to an office. The room was empty and there were papers and furniture strewn across the floor. The phone was broken into pieces and the desk had been overturned. Just then, I heard someone shouting. It was coming from the street and it sounded like Oleg's. I was about to rush to the front door and let him in when I heard a rustling sound. Suddenly, another door in the corridor opened and I saw a figure lurking in the darkness. "Who's there?" I demanded. There was no response, but I saw 2 familiar red eyes peering at me from the darkness. I froze horror. For a moment, I was so petrified that I could not move. The figure emerged from the darkness and stepped into the dim, flickering light. It was the same face I had seen at the river, but he was wearing different clothes. It was a policeman's uniform. Suddenly, the man came towards me at lightning speed. He covered a distance of 3 meters in less than a second and grabbed me by the throat with his strong, bony hands. The man stuck out his black tongue, licking his lips and gnashing his crooked teeth. As I watched in horror, his face started shifting and changing right before my eyes. Without thinking, I reached out and grabbed the first thing I could find. It was a pen. I raised it above my head, and with all my might, I drove it into the man's neck. Bright red blood gushed from the wound, and the man let out a high-pitched screech. His grip loosened on my neck, and I managed to break free. I rushed down the hallway and yanked open the first door I saw. Inside, there was a pile of human flesh and gnawed bones. The sight made my stomach turn and a wave of nausea overcame me. I fell to my knees and threw up on the ground. I was shaking with fear. I realized that this was the remains of the other policeman. Just then, I remembered Oleg. He was waiting for me outside. I ran to the front door and opened it. When I saw the familiar face of Oleg on the other side, I wanted to cry. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "I heard you shouting." Oleg nodded. "Everything is fine." he said. Once again, I thought I saw someone moving around inside. Let's go home before that crazy guy comes back. We ran all the way home, and when we reached Oleg's house, we found that his parents were not there. On the table, there was a note. Gone to visit your grandmother. We'll be back late tonight. We went around the empty house, securing all the windows and locking all the doors. We were barricading ourselves inside. Oleg was surprisingly calm. My hands were shaking so much I could barely hold anything. After we finished securing the house, I picked up the phone to try and get help, but there was no dial tone. We were cut off from the rest of the world. We sat down in the living room and turned on the TV. There was nothing on the news, everything was going on as usual. Whatever was happening, it seemed to be just confined to our little town. I took out a pen and a sheet of paper and tried to write down exactly what happened to us. I don't know why, but somehow it made me feel better. If we don't make it through this, then at least someone will find this piece of paper and know what happened to us. Oleg is sitting beside me right now, but he is strangely pale. I asked him if he is okay, but he just shrugged his shoulders. Something is wrong. He got up and went to the toilet. He's in there now. All of a sudden, a wild fear seized me. Maybe it's just my paranoia going out of control. From head to toe, looked at the pen in his hands. Cannot be flashed through my head. Trying to speak very loudly but calmly, I asked Oleg, by the way, where is your sister? Did she go with your parents? Rice heard his voice from the bathroom saying probably. As the realization slowly sunk in, a cold wave of horror washed over me, and I put my head in my hands. I wanted to cry. Oleg doesn't have a sister. In the uneasy silence, I can hear the bathroom door opening with an ominous creak. The native villagers around these parts say that there's a stretch of tundra just north of here that is occupied by benevolent spirits. These spirits grant insight and warning to whoever visits them at night once the sun has disappeared entirely and left the world in jet darkness. I drove out to the middle of the frozen expanse of ice and waited, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever commanded these people's reverence. They send their children out bundled in furs to keep from freezing on the eve of their 15th birthday to seek an audience with these spirits. Once they have achieved this, the children run home to their parents to share the news. From then on, these children are considered adults in the village. Engaged couples visit this tundra on the night before their wedding. The entire village stays up all night awaiting their return, as it is upon their return that the couple either decides to proceed with their marriage or to abandon it. The elderly visit the tundra whenever they are sick or ailing, and often make their condition worse by staying all night in the cold. When they return, however, it is most often with an air of sheer serenity. So I waited, curious to see what phenomenon might inspire people so powerfully. I waited for hours, bundled in my parka and sitting on the hood of my pickup. I waited until I felt that I was going to freeze to death, even in my thick clothing. I heard the spirit before I saw it. A crunching of snow in the silence made me jump off my truck and spin around. A hunched, gray-skinned man stood a few meters away. Sad, yellowed eyes stared back at me, set inside a skull from which sprouted only a few greasy hairs. He breathed heavily, with a rattle that shook his fragile ribcage, and one of his arms looked as if it had been messily broken and then neglected, allowing it to knit back together imperfectly. Badly scarred flesh marred his splayed legs. The man stared at me for perhaps 10 seconds, breathing in the frigid air and exhaling a sickly dribble of steam, before disappearing when I blinked my eyes. I spun around, looking for the man, but he was truly gone. Approaching where he had stood, I found a pair of bloody footprints in the snow. Frantic with fear, I got into my pickup and headed for the village as fast as the ice would allow. A few villagers were waiting for me when I arrived. Knowing that I had gone out and curious as to what might happen, I hastily got out of my truck and, approaching the nearest villager, I demanded, what is so benevolent about these spirits? What is so insightful? How do these spirits help you? What did you see? He asked, the look on his face now mirroring the fear in mine. I saw a man horribly disfigured and desperately sick. I screamed into his face, and the rest of the villagers around us backed away a step. Why? What does that mean? I begged him. The spirits show only one thing, the man explained. They show their visitors a year in the future. This story is about a man named Diogo from central Portugal who has the unique ability to predict when someone is going to die. My name is Diogo, and I live in a small village located in central Portugal. Things are quiet here. I go to school, I have many friends, and even have a girlfriend. It's all going great, and this despite my handicap. At least that's the way I think about it. First, Rajin. Indeed, you see, I can foretell when a person is going to die. All I need is a look at his face. either on a TV, a photograph, or when I'm in front of someone. The difference being that I see them without a face. I can see their heads with their ears and hair, but there's no mouth, no nose, no eyes or eyebrows. It all started when I was a kid. Back at home, there was this picture of the family on the fireplace. Grandmother, grandfather, my parents, my big sister, and I. At some point, I couldn't help but notice grandmother's face had all but vanished from the picture. Of course, this remained unnoticed by the whole family, and everyone just kept asking me to be quiet and cause no trouble. But some days later, grandmother passed away following a heart attack. I didn't immediately see the connection. Nor did my parents. It's not like she was in her prime, you know? Then it was grandfather's turn. His face had vanished from the picture here again. Once again, I tried to tell my parents, but that only led to more fighting. But I couldn't argue with the facts, as some days after that, grandfather died as well from a stroke. That time, my parents could no longer deny the truth and not believe me. They did ask me to keep it all a secret and not tell anyone. They saw that as a curse and feared this could lead to trouble. This kind of ability would tend to make people suspicious should this be turning out to be true. It all went smoothly from there. This handicap was not all that difficult to bear, and I thank God for that. I did see faceless people out in the street or when I watched TV. I told my loved ones about Michael Jackson days before it actually happened, and they managed to make a bundle from buying collections of CDs before everyone else did and selling every one of those for a ridiculous amount. And I know, that is not a particularly nice thing to do, but it was my gift, my curse, and I had to make do with it, so I figured I might as well make full use of that. You might be asking yourself, why am I telling you all that now? Why am I revealing that secret to the whole wide world now? What happened? Do I want to know if somebody else possesses the same ability? No, don't care. Do I want to be famous? Far from it. The truth is, my dear friends, as of this morning, I haven't seen a single face. The TV people are faceless. All my Facebook friends are faceless. Same goes for all the people out in the streets. Same goes for me in the mirror. I don't know what's going to happen, but I suggest you start living from now on as you never have before. Have all the fun you can, dance away. Make love, pray. Do whatever you want. Because in a few days, we'll all see each other in the next world. The Thing in the Cabin is a scary story about a creature in the woods that has the power to control men's minds. The old man was weak and sick. His body wouldn't last much longer. I made the old man get up and walk to the window. He looked out and saw them standing there in the snow. There were 4 hunters gathered outside the cabin. I saw them too, through his eyes. The hunters carried long guns, and they were shivering with the cold. One of them walked up and banged on the door. "Hello in there," he shouted. "Hello! We're lost and we need a place to stay for the night." I pulled the old man away from the window and made him bar the door. "We have a little money we can give you," the hunters shouted. "We just need a warm place to spend the night and a little food if you can spare it. We're freezing to death out here." I made the old man throw another log on the fire. "You don't need to be scared of us," the hunter said. "We'll leave our guns outside. We don't mean you any harm." I made the old man pick up his rifle and aim it through a slit in the cabin door. Then I giggled as I made him pull the trigger. There was a loud bang and one of the hunters dropped in the snow. He didn't know what hit him. The others were taken off guard. They dragged their friend's body away and took cover behind the trees. Gunshots exploded, ripping through the wooden door and breaking some of the windows. I released my hold on the old man's brain, and he collapsed in a heap on the floor. I flew up the chimney and soared above the cabin. The gunshots stopped and the hunters retreated. They would be back? I flew high above the treetops and followed them. When they stopped, I drifted down and landed in the branches of a tall tree. The hunters were below me. They were setting up camp and building a fire. There were 3 of them now. A fat one, a skinny one, and a bearded one. The dead one lay nearby, staining the snow red with his blood. We had no use for him. The bearded one chopped wood with his axe. He looked healthy and strong. The skinny one was struggling to light the fire, while the fat one just sat there and watched. I listened as the fat one spoke to the others. He told them that they would camp there for the night, and in the morning they would attack the cabin and kill the old man. I sat there in the branches of the tree and waited for night to come. When it was dark, the men curled up around their blazing fire and tried to get some sleep. I waited until they were lying still, and then I dropped down noiselessly into the snow. I crept towards the fat man who was wrapped up in his fur coat, snoring peacefully. Slowly, I reached out and took hold of the fat man's minds. I made him get up and walk over to where the dead man lay in the snow. I made him kneel down beside the corpse and take out his hunting knife. Then I made him saw through the neck of his dead friend. When he was done, I made him smear his face with blood. Then I made him pick up the severed head and carry it back to the fire. I released my hold on the fat man's mind, and that's where I left him, standing in front of the fire, smeared with blood and holding the dead man's severed head. When he looked down and saw the head, he screamed and woke the others. They scrambled to their feet and stared in horror at the severed head the fat man was clutching. I watched it all from the safety of the trees. There were shouts and more screams as the skinny one and the bearded one grabbed their guns and blasted the fat man until he lay in a bloody heap on the snow. Now there were only two. They sat by the fire and waited. I watched and waited too. They were waiting for dawn to arrive. Then they would attack the cabin and kill the old man. The bearded one threw more wood on the fire. He was too scared to sleep. The skinny one was weaker. He lay down and closed his eyes. I took my chance, creeping up to the skinny one and reaching into his mind. I made him take out his hunting knife. I made him slowly get to his feet. The bearded one stared at us, wondering what was going on. I made the skinny one leap across the flames and attack the bearded one. The skinny one was weak and the bearded one was too strong for him. I knew he would lose the fight. I released his mind and flew into the trees, to watch from a safe distance. There was a fierce struggle, but in the end, the bearded one prevailed. He plunged the hunting knife into his friend's chest and left the skinny one to bleed out on the snow. Now there was only one. I flew back to the cabin and slipped down the chimney. The old man lay on the floor where I left him. I took hold of his mind again, and we searched through the cabin. There was not much in the place that I could use. Frail, reedy, and a rusty metal box, I found a pair of garden shears. The handles were rusty, but the blades were still sharp. I made the old man pick them up. I made him look out the window, and through his eyes, I saw the bearded one coming across the snow, his gun at the ready. "Come out, old man," the bearded one cried. "Come out or I'll kill you." He fired his gun and a bullet ripped through the cabin door. I made the old man shout, "Okay, I'm coming out." I made him open the garden shears and place the blades at either side of his neck. Then I made him throw open the door and walk out into the sunlight. When the bearded one saw him, he stopped in his tracks and raised his gun. "What are you up to, old man?" he demanded. The old man didn't say a word. I wouldn't let him. The bearded man cautiously approached. "Why did you have to start shooting at us?" he asked. "We didn't mean you any harm. We just needed a place to stay." The old man resisted me, and for a moment, I lost control. A thin wail escaped his lips. "Help me," he begged. I regained control of his mind, and summoning all the strength he had in his withered arms, I made him slam the handles of the shears together. The blades snapped together, slicing off his head. It fell to the ground with a thud. Then his body crumpled and collapsed in a bloody heap. My grip on his mind was broken and I floated upwards. The bearded one was so shocked and stunned that all he could do was stare in horror at the terrible sight. I took advantage of his momentary weakness, dropping onto his shoulders and reaching into his brain to take charge. Now he was mine. After we dragged the bodies into the cabin, we feasted on the remains until I was satiated. I made the bearded man throw another log on the fire and we sat down in the rocking chair. Together, we rocked back and forth, enjoying the heat from the roaring flames. The bearded man was strong and healthy. His body would last a long time. The Creature in the Village is a scary story about a young woman who spends the weekend in her cottage and encounters something terrifying. My name is Magda, and I'm 26 years old. I work in an office in the city. On weekends, I used to love to get away from all the hustle and bustle and take a trip to the countryside. Luckily, I have a cottage in a small village, which is located right at the edge of the forest. How I used to love to get out of the city and spend the weekend in my little cottage. Why did I stop? Well, I'll tell you. After a hard week at work, I needed a rest, so I decided to get out of town. I went home, packed my bags, threw them in the trunk, and drove off. When I arrived in the village, it was late in the evening, and I was tired from the long drive. I went straight to bed and fell asleep quickly. As for middle of the night, I was awakened by the sound of my car alarm going off. I looked out the window, but there was nobody in sight. I found my car keys, pressed the button to shut off the alarm. When the awful noise stopped, I lay down again and tried to fall back asleep. All of a sudden, the alarm went off again. I didn't feel like getting up, so I just grabbed my keys and pressed the button again. Everything was peaceful and quiet. 5 minutes later, the alarm went off a third time. Once or twice could have been an accident, but now I was wondering what was going on. Could someone be playing tricks on me in the middle of the night? I got up again and pressed the button to turn off the alarm, but this time I didn't lay down. I stood at the curtains and watched, and after a few minutes I saw something by the light of the moon. A shadow emerged from the bushes and slowly approached the car. I could just about make out the shape. It was something tall, skinny, and black. The figure reached out with its long, thin arms and knocked on the car. The alarm went off again, and quick as a flash, the dark figure retreated back into the bushes. At that moment, I realized what was going on and began shaking with fear. I turned off the alarm and continued to watch. The thing emerged from the bushes again and slid silently over to the gate. Threw a hand through them and removed the partition holding the gates closed. I was paralyzed with fear and I couldn't move. My mind was overcome by panicked thoughts. What was it? What did it want from me? What was it doing? Would it ever go away? A shiver ran through my body from my head down to my toes. My mouth was dry and my heart was beating fast. I was so tense, I was gritting my teeth and clenching my hands into fists. I brought control of myself and ran down the stairs as fast as my legs would carry me. To the ground floor. I wanted to look for something I could use to protect myself. However, just as I was about to switch on the lights, I suddenly froze in my tracks. The dark figure was at the window. It was pressed up against the glass. Staring in, looking to see whether or not there was someone home, I immediately ducked down behind the sofa and peered out. That's when I realized what all these tricks with the car were for. It was trying to lure its victim outside. I could not take my eyes off its hideous face. The skin was the color of ash and covered with wrinkles. Its eyes were small, beady, and completely black. Instead of a nose, there were 2 ragged holes. It didn't have any lips, just 2 rows of sharp, yellow teeth. Its breathing was so heavy and hoarse that it was misting up the window. I just knew it was not going to go away. After standing at the window for a few moments, I heard a rustling noise as it came to the front door. I watched as it tried to push its fingers through the gap under the door. The handle began to twitch wildly up and down. And then the creature emitted a chilling sound. It was not like the human voice. It was a deep, beastly growl like an angry dog chewing on a bone. I knew that if it heard me, it would keep trying until it found a way to get into the house. I just crouched down behind the sofa, hiding in the shadows and desperately trying not to make a sound. Tears began involuntarily streaming down my face no matter how much I tried to stop them. I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples, and I was shaking like a leaf just waiting for it to end. I don't know how long I cowered there. I must have passed out. When I woke up and looked at the door, the creature was gone. The door was still in place, and everything seemed secure. I have never been so relieved in all my life. I ran upstairs and looked out the window. It was light outside and there was no sign of anything wrong. Taking a chance, I grabbed my keys and without stopping to collect any of my things, I ran out to the car. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove away from the village as fast as I could. I didn't stop driving until I got back to the city. When I got back to my apartment, I turned on the radio and heard a news report. The announcer said that in the village, the dead bodies of 2 girls had been discovered. Their corpses had been mutilated and dumped in a swamp. I guess the creature found what it was looking for. Bubble Bath is a scary little tale about a young girl who has a horrifying experience in her own bathroom. Jennifer was sitting at the desk in her bedroom. Finishing up her homework, she had an exam the next day and needed to study. As she was searching for one of her school books, she received a text message on her cell phone. She didn't recognize the number, but the text read, "Take a bubble bath and go to bed, it's a school night, Mom." She probably ran out of credit and texted me from someone else's phone. Thought Jennifer? She had already been planning to take a nice, relaxing bubble bath soon anyway. So she undressed, grabbed a clean towel, and walked into the bathroom. She stopped in her tracks, surprised. The bathtub had already been filled to the brim. That's strange, she thought. I guess Mom filled it in advance. Shrugging her shoulders, Jennifer dropped the towel and climbed into the bath. Her whole body was submerged before she became aware of a burning sensation all over her skin. Within seconds, the burning feeling got worse and worse until she was crying out in agony. She jumped out of the bath, but it was too late. To her horror, she saw the water stained red. Blood red, the skin on her arms and legs was beginning to peel off. She looked at her leg and the skin there was peeling off too. Then her chest and stomach began to peel. All the skin on her body was coming off. Pieces of her skin fell to the floor and she started screaming in pain. Her blood formed a puddle around her on the bathroom floor. In terrible pain, Jennifer opened the door of the bathroom and hobbled out. She made her way to her bedroom. Every step was agony. She left a bloody trail along the carpet. She picked up her cell phone to call the police, but there was a new text message waiting for her. It read, "Next time, bathe in water." Jennifer heard laughter behind her and turned around to find a tall man, dressed in black, standing in the doorway. He was holding a jagged knife in one hand and an empty container of sulfuric acid in the other. Knock Knock is a scary story about a young boy and his sister who are left home alone when their parents go out for the night. It is based on an urban legend. As their mother was leaving, they told her children not to open the door under any circumstances. If anyone knocks, don't answer it, she told them. But the boy and his sister didn't pay attention to their mother's warning. They thought she was being too careful. They figured they could take care of themselves in any situation. About an hour after the parents left, the kids heard a knock, knock, knock on the front door. They decided to ignore it, but again, they heard knock, knock, knock. It happened again and again, and it grew louder each time. Eventually, the girl couldn't stand it anymore, and she told her brother she was going to answer the door. When the boy reminded her of their mother's warning, the girl just wouldn't listen. Again, they heard the knock, knock, knock on the door. Finally, the sister went downstairs. Her brother lay on the sofa watching TV. He heard his sister's footsteps walking down the stairs. He heard her asking loudly who is it. He heard her open the lock on the front door. Then he heard only silence. He lay there for a while listening for any noise, but heard nothing. Eventually, he started getting scared. His sister still hadn't returned. He was afraid to call out to his sister, so he sneaked out the back door and made his way to their neighbor's house. When he went into their house, his neighbor was watching the local news channel on TV. The news anchor on TV was talking about a murder. Then they showed a reporter live at the scene of the murder. The neighbor said to the boy, "Hey, that looks like your house." The boy was shaking with fear. "That is my house," he said, "and that's my front door." The Washing Machine is a horror story about a babysitter who hears strange noises coming from the basement. There was a teenage girl who was hired to babysit 2 young children. After the parents left, she put the children to bed and then went downstairs to watch TV. Suddenly, she heard a noise coming from the basement. It was the washing machine starting up. She was about to go and turn it off, but when she opened the basement door, the noise stopped. Shrugging her shoulders, she returned to the living room and resumed watching TV. 5 minutes later, she heard the washing machine starting up again. She got up, opened the basement door, and started walking down the steps. She had only gone down a few steps when the noise stopped again. She went back to watch TV. 5 minutes later, she heard the washing machine yet again. Worried, she went upstairs, gathered the children, and ran over to the neighbor's house to call the police. They arrived a few minutes later and went down to search the basement. They found a man armed with an axe, hiding behind the washing machine. He had been trying to lure the babysitter down to the basement in order to kill her.